I still remember that night as if it happened yesterday. The wind was howling through the trees, carrying with it the faint smell of rain and gun oil. We were stationed at a remote outpost near the border, miles away from any real civilization. Sergeant Miller and I had been serving together for almost 5 years. He wasn't just my superior officer, he was my friend, my brother in arms. Miller was the kind of man who didn't talk much, but when he did, every word meant something. He had this way of looking at you, straight into your soul, like he could see all your fears and still respect you for having them. He always carried this small, worn-out notebook in his left pocket. Said it helped him remember the things that shouldn't be forgotten. I never asked what that meant. Maybe I should have. That evening, everything felt off. The radio had been picking up strange static all day, voices fading in and out, like whispers from another world. Miller seemed distracted. During dinner, he barely touched his food, staring instead at the horizon where the sun was bleeding into the clouds. When night fell, the rain finally came. It started slow, then turned into a heavy downpour that drowned out every sound. Around midnight, I went to check on the perimeter. Miller said he'd join me in a few minutes. He never did. At first, I thought he was resting, maybe writing in that damn notebook again. But when I came back, his bunk was empty. His rifle was gone. His helmet, too. Only the notebook remained, lying open on the table, the ink smeared by rain that had blown in through the open door. The last line read, "They're closer than we think. If I don't come back, tell my wife I was right." That's when the radio crackled again, a faint voice repeating Miller's call sign. But it wasn't him. It sounded distorted, almost wrong. That night, Sergeant Miller disappeared into the storm, and none of us ever saw him again. By morning, the rain had stopped, but the air still felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath. The outpost looked different in daylight, as if the storm had washed away more than just the mud. Miller's absence hung over us like fog. No one said it out loud, but we all knew something wasn't right. I reported his disappearance to command at dawn. They told me to wait for further instructions, but waiting wasn't in my nature, not when a man like Miller was missing. I gathered a small team, Corporal Diaz, Medic Lewis, and a new recruit named Harper. We began combing through the forest, following what little evidence we had. Faint boot prints in the mud, a snapped branch, a trail that seemed to lead nowhere. About 2 miles out, we found the first sign. Miller's dog tags, tangled in a bush, still wet from the storm. I picked them up, and for a moment, I swore I could feel warmth on the metal, like they hadn't been there long. Harper suggested maybe Miller had deserted. The words hit me like a punch. Miller? Desert? The man who'd once run into enemy fire to drag me out? Not a chance. We pressed deeper into the woods. The silence there was unnatural. No birds, no wind, not even the hum of insects, just the sound of our boots sinking into the wet ground. Every step felt like we were walking into something we shouldn't disturb. Around noon, Diaz stopped dead in his tracks. He was pointing at something half buried under a pile of leaves. It was a radio, the same model we used at the outpost, but its casing was cracked, and the antenna bent at a strange angle. When Lewis tried to turn it on, static filled the air, followed by a faint voice. Greater than, "Still watching. You can't." Then silence. Lewis looked at me, pale as a ghost. "That's Miller's voice," he whispered. We carried the radio back to camp. Command told us to secure the perimeter and wait for the investigation unit. But that night, before anyone could sleep, something else happened. At exactly 11:15 a.m., our radio operator reported hearing movement outside the fence line. One man, walking slowly through the trees. No lights, no sound, just the crunch of wet earth. When I got to the lookout post, I saw him, a silhouette standing just beyond the searchlights. The rain had started again, blurring the figure's edges, but I recognized the stance, straight back, hands behind him, head tilted slightly to the left. It was Miller. "Sergeant," I shouted. He didn't move, didn't answer. When we turned on the floodlights, he was gone. Only footprints remained, but they didn't lead away from the fence. They led toward it and stopped, as if he'd vanished into thin air. A week after the explosion, when the smoke had settled and the military had tightened its grip around the ruins, I received an anonymous envelope, no return address. Inside, a small flash drive and a note that simply read, "You were right. Watch before they find you." I hesitated for hours before plugging it in. My hands trembled, my heart raced. What I saw made me wish I hadn't. The footage was time-stamped, 2 days before the incident. It showed a small team, not our soldiers, entering the weapons bay under heavy security. They weren't inspecting. They were installing something. I froze the frame. The logo on one man's uniform wasn't military. It was corporate. One of the private contractors that had recently partnered with the government. As the video continued, I heard a voice I knew too well. "Proceed with the detonation schedule. We'll blame malfunction. Cleanup team on standby." It was Colonel Hensley, the man who had personally shaken my hand after the blast, calling me a hero for surviving. The room seemed to spin. My chest tightened as realization set in. This wasn't a tragedy. It was a cover-up. The explosion had been planned to erase something or someone. Maybe me, maybe the data I had found earlier. I copied the files, hid them across multiple drives, and sent a copy to an old journalist friend. Within hours, I started receiving calls from blocked numbers. My apartment was searched. My clearance was revoked. The official report came out the next day. Technical malfunction. No survivors apart from Captain Rains. I read that line over and over. My name, now a lie in their story. They wanted me alive just long enough to play the grieving soldier, the decorated survivor who'd vouch for the official truth. But as I replayed the video again in the dark, something new caught my eye, a reflection in the glass behind the colonel. A woman, wearing the same insignia as the nurse who'd saved me in the field. She looked straight at the camera. Straight at me. That's when I realized this wasn't over. Someone else knew, and maybe, just maybe, I wasn't meant to survive after all. 3 nights after the tapes, I woke to the sound of footsteps in the hospital corridor, slow, deliberate, echoing against sterile tiles. My room was supposed to be under military watch, 2 guards outside the door, cameras in the hall, but the monitor by my bed flickered, showing only static. I reached for the emergency call button. Dead. The lights dimmed for a moment, then stabilized. A tall shadow stopped by my door. I held my breath. Then the door creaked open just enough for me to see a figure. A woman, wearing a nurse's uniform. Her badge reflected the faint glow of the monitor. My pulse stopped when I saw the insignia, the same one from the reflection in the video. She didn't speak, just walked closer, her face half hidden under the fluorescent light. "You shouldn't have watched it," she whispered, her voice calm, almost kind. "They'll come for you soon, but you still have time." I asked who she was, what she wanted. She didn't answer. She handed me a folded piece of paper, her hands trembling. "They think they erased everything. They didn't. The truth is buried in file Z19. And then she was gone. When the lights flicked back on, 2 soldiers stormed in. No trace of her, no record of anyone entering or leaving. The cameras, they said, had malfunctioned again. I opened the note once they left. Inside was a map, or rather, a schematic. It was the layout of the facility where the explosion had occurred, with one section circled in red, the Lower East Sublevel, marked Storage Bay Z19. That section had been classified as destroyed beyond recovery. But according to the map, there was a secondary access tunnel, sealed but not collapsed. That night, I made a decision. My discharge papers would be ready in 2 days. I'd use that time to disappear. Before I left, I went to find the nurse, but no one by her description worked there. No one had ever seen her. I replayed the colonel's voice in my head. Proceed with detonation schedule. Cleanup team on standby. If the cleanup team had missed something, if Z19 still existed, then it held the truth. I packed only what I could carry: a flashlight, a lighter, a small pistol, and a drive. The hospital security cameras caught me leaving at 3:42 a.m., walking alone down the empty street. In my reflection on the glass doors, I saw something that made me stop cold for just a second. A faint silhouette behind me, like a nurse standing in the hallway's glow, watching, waiting. I didn't look back. The road to the ruins felt longer than it had any right to be. The old industrial district had been fenced off years ago, but rusted gates and overgrown weeds couldn't hide what once happened there. My ID still granted me access to one checkpoint, the rest. I crossed through a gap in the fence, beneath a half-collapsed warning sign, "Restricted Zone Biohazard." The air inside smelled of damp concrete and burnt metal. My flashlight beam cut through the dust, revealing graffiti, broken stretchers, and the remnants of lab equipment. Each step echoed like a gunshot. I followed the map from the nurse's note, down 2 flights of stairs, past a sealed bulkhead with the number Z19 barely visible under grime. The door was welded shut, but the wall to its right had cracked from the explosion years ago. I pressed through the narrow opening, scraping my jacket on the concrete. On the other side was a narrow corridor, cables hanging like vines. My boots crushed glass, and somewhere deeper, water dripped steadily. The first room I found looked like a lab. Computers still sat on the desks, their screens shattered, but intact enough to reveal faint outlines of login prompts. I tried one, nothing, but inside a metal locker, wrapped in plastic, was a hard drive labeled Incident Logs Z19. I slipped it into my bag. That's when the power surged. The overhead lights flickered once, then stayed on, dim but alive. A low hum vibrated through the floor. Generators? No, impossible. This place had been abandoned for more than a decade. Then I heard it. Footsteps, faint but deliberate. I turned off my flashlight and waited. A silhouette appeared at the far end of the hall, tall, wearing a hazmat suit. The face shield reflected the pale light so I couldn't see who it was. "Identify yourself," I shouted, my voice cracking against the walls. No answer. The figure turned and disappeared into another corridor. Against every instinct, I followed. The path led to a reinforced chamber. Inside were metal containers, each tagged with chemical codes and serial numbers. One had been pried open, revealing stacks of files wrapped in waxed paper. I opened one. It wasn't chemical data, it was a list of personnel, names, ranks, and designations. Many of them marked deceased in action, including mine. Next to it, a handwritten note. Subject cleared. Project continues under new designation. My stomach tightened. Project continues? After all these years? That's when the lights above me started to hum louder, and the speakers crackled to life. "Sergeant Halley," said a familiar voice. Calm, controlled. "The Colonel, you were supposed to die in that explosion. But since you didn't, let's finish this properly." Every light went out. In the darkness, I could still hear the slow, steady sound of boots approaching from behind. The darkness pressed down on me, thick and suffocating. My flashlight had died when the power went out, and the only sound was the echo of the boots closing in. Every instinct screamed to run, but the hallways of Z19 to become a maze in my mind. I ducked behind a stack of crates, pressing my back against the cold metal, heart hammering so loud it might give me away. The voice of the Colonel repeated in my head. Let's finish this properly. He had been orchestrating this from the shadows all along, making sure I never learned the full truth about Z19. But now, after years of silence, I was finally here. I couldn't turn back. A faint light flickered at the end of the corridor. I moved toward it slowly, each step careful, listening for movement behind me. The hum of the generators returned in waves, casting long shadows that danced across the cracked walls. Then I saw it, an emergency exit half buried under rubble. I squeezed through, scraping my arms, lungs burning, and finally stumbled outside. The night air was sharp, cold, and real. The abandoned facility loomed behind me like a sleeping beast, dark and indifferent. I paused, looking back, trying to process everything. The hard drive in my bag felt heavier than before, loaded not only with evidence, but with the weight of decades of lies and hidden atrocities. I drove through empty streets to the nearest safe house, my mind replaying every moment. The files revealed the truth. Z-19 had been a top-secret military experiment designed to test chemical and psychological warfare on soldiers and civilians alike. The accidents, the deaths in action, none of it was random, and I had survived it all, unplanned, unintended. Over the next few days, I decrypted the hard drive. Names of victims, lists of experiments, operational directives, everything meticulously logged. I realized the stranger who had left the original note in my old records had been a whistleblower, someone who wanted the truth to reach me when I was ready, and I had been ready. The colonel tried to contact me afterward, but I was prepared. Every call, every attempt to intimidate me was documented. I went public. The files went to journalists, authorities, and eventually, the world learned about Z-19. Some tried to deny it, others fled, but the evidence was irrefutable. For the first time in decades, I felt a strange peace. I had walked into the heart of a lie, faced the people who wanted me gone, and emerged with the truth. And even though the scars would remain, I had reclaimed my life, not just for myself, but for everyone who had been silenced in Z-19. I kept the hard drive, a reminder of what had been lost and what had been uncovered. And as I looked at the sunrise over the empty industrial district, I understood finally, the past doesn't define you. What you do with the truth that defines everything. The stranger had changed everything. And now, so had I.